It was a quiet kind of evening, the kind that smells like rosemary and lemon peel, and hums with the sound of a dishwasher in the distance. I'd made roast chicken, golden-skinned, little dry this time, and buttered beans, because Clara likes them just so, crisp but not squeaky. The rice had clumped a little. I didn't mention it. I just watched her plate, the way she moved food around with that tidy grace of hers. As if manners had mass and weight, Michael had asked for wine, which he never did before Clara. He said it helped him unwind after work, though I suspected he liked how it looked in his hand more than how it tasted. I'd poured just a small glass for myself, more out of habit than desire. The bottle stood between us on the table like a fragile. Witness. Clara dabbed at her mouth with her napkin. Careful, precise. Then she said it. We've been thinking. Maybe it's time you looked into assisted living. She said it the way you might suggest a different brand of detergent. Softly, politely. As if she were offering me a solution to a problem I didn't. No, I had. The words didn't even echo. They just landed like a wet cloth on a clean floor. Michael didn't look up. He was cutting into his chicken, his eyes fixed on the plate as if dissecting poultry required all his concentration. That was the part that stayed with me, the way he kept eating. The sound of his fork against ceramic, steady and deliberate. Not a twitch of protest, not even a sigh. He had agreed to it long before she spoke. I nodded, smiled, swallowed the wine. It tasted bitter all of a sudden, like old grapes and dust. Something inside me cracked then, not loudly. It wasn't dramatic. It felt more like pressure building in a place that had already been hollowed out, like porcelain, old and hairline fractured, finally giving way beneath warm hands. I looked at Clara, and she was smiling in that way of hers, too serene, too symmetrical. It wasn't cruelty, not exactly. It was more like efficiency. Come to a conclusion, drafted a plan, and now she was executing it. I was a step in that plan. A line item. I see, I murmured, and I did. I saw it all at once, the months of closed-door conversations, the sideways glances, the calculated generosity, the way my things had been moved to make space for new ones. Little by little, the house had been rearranged around me until I know. Longer fit, the roast chicken had gone cold. I picked at the beans and said something about the weather. I don't remember what exactly. Just that my voice sounded small but steady, like it had practiced that steadiness in secret. Clara rose first, gathering plates as if nothing had passed between us. Michael took the wine bottle with him to the living room. I remained at the table, listening to the distant clink of dishes and the hum of the ceiling fan. The house had that echo again, the one it gets when people stop speaking and start thinking too loudly later. I went to my room, still mine, though Clara had replaced the curtains and the lamp, and my prayer mat had been folded and stored without. Asking, I sat on the edge of the bed and watched the shadows shift across the floor. The air was warm. I could hear them laughing softly from down the hall. Something on the TV, maybe. Or just the shared relief of something hard finally said aloud. I didn't cry. That surprised me. There was no flood of emotion, no trembling hands. Just a kind of quiet inventory taking place inside me. A tally of things I had given and things I had lost. A silent calculation of rooms cleaned, meals cooked, debts forgiven. When I closed my eyes, I remembered the first time Michael fell off a bicycle. His knees scraped, his face red with frustration. He had looked up at me then, eyes full of fear, waiting for my cue on whether to cry or not. I'd kissed the wound and told him he was brave. He'd believed me. And I suppose, in that moment, I believed it too. But now, in this house, at this table, under Clara's polite smile and Michael's silent approval, I wasn't the mother who kissed wounds. I was something else entirely, a burden with a pulse. I lay back and listened to the fan click overhead. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once and stopped. I thought about that word she used, assisted. It was a pretty word, almost noble. But what she really meant was removed, tidied away, packed like old linen. I turned off the light, and for the first time in years, I began to think. Not with hurt. Not yet. Just with clarity. The first time I met Clara, it was the second day of Eid. I remember because I had spent most of the morning tying little ribbon knots around trays of methi for the neighbors. And my wrists still smelled, faintly, of sugar and cardamom. Michael arrived late, apologetic, with flowers from a roadside stall and a girl trailing just behind him. Both of them glowing from some secret only they shared. She smelled like lilies and something sharper, maybe. Ambition, maybe new perfume. Her dupatta was pinned just so, and her smile was broad, a little too rehearsed. She hugged me too quickly, calling me auntie like it had already been decided. Her bangles clinked against mine. I noticed her nails were short and clean. Not the kind that cooked or scrubbed, but the kind that signed things and typed quickly. Michael was giddy in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy with a school prize. He pulled her forward gently, announcing her name twice as if I hadn't heard it the first time. Clara, not a name I'd expected. He handed me the flowers and waited, as if my approval were a form he needed signed. I smiled, of course. I said the right things, invited her in, offered tea and sweets. I remember thinking, she's lovely, and also, she's too quiet with me. There's a kind of silence that's natural, shy, unsure. But Clara's quiet was sculpted. She knew where to pause, when to nod, how to speak in questions that sounded like compliments. Everything about her seemed curated, like a perfectly arranged bouquet. Beautiful, yes, but already cut from the root. That day, I caught her watching me when she thought I wasn't looking. Not curiously, not warmly, more like she was noting. Things, the way I folded the napkins, the pattern on my tea set, how long I let the chai steep. Her warmth was there, but it shimmered on the surface, never sinking in. Michael kept filling the silences. He told stories I'd heard before about his job, about college, even about the neighbor's cat. I watched him laugh at things that weren't funny, and I wondered if he was auditioning for something, or maybe trying to prove something to her, to me, to himself. That he could be the bridge between two very different women. When they left, that day, Clara thanked me with both hands clasped, and Michael kissed my cheek like he hadn't in years. I stood at the door longer than necessary, the lilies beginning to wilt in my grip, thinking how strange it is that love can arrive in a dress stitched just right with borrowed manners and polite small talk, and still unsettle the bones. She called me auntie for a full year, even after the engagement, even at the nikah. I told myself it was habit, that maybe her own family had different customs. But somewhere deep inside, it felt like a deliberate distance, as if she was waiting for something, proof, perhaps, that I had earned the title of Amie in her eyes. Or maybe she needed to see what came with it. When she finally did call me, that Amie was at their new apartment. It's the one I helped furnish. Her voice was soft, almost offhand, as if the word had been added to her vocabulary without much weight. But I felt it land inside me like a bookmark, marking the end of something I couldn't name and the beginning of something I hadn't yet understood. Looking back now, see how clearly it all was staged. Not cruelly, just transactionally. Clara knew how to enter a family like someone entering a boardroom. Read the room, smile, adapt. She was clever. I always thought that, but I mistook cleverness for depth, and politeness for affection. Sometimes first impressions aren't wrong. They're just half complete, like sketches without the ink. I saw Clara that day, but only the version she wanted me to see. It's what came later, the edits, the pauses, it's the vanishings that painted in the rest. Michael once told me, during that first visit, that Clara loved old houses and family traditions. I remember smiling at that, thinking maybe I'd found someone to hand my kitchen over to one day. But I never imagined she'd start rearranging it before I had the chance to let go. I suppose some people arrive with soft voices and scented hands, and still manage to unsettle a whole home. They were newly married then, still living in that cramped two-bedroom flat in Goshen, with the peeling paint and the gas that went out every few days. It was a forgettable building with a rusted elevator that wheezed like an old man and a corridor that always smelled of wet cement. I had only visited once, right after the Ruxati. Clara had apologized for the mess and offered me instant coffee. In a chipped mug, she seemed flustered but polished. Always just polished enough. Michael had sounded tired that night. I remember because I was halfway through folding laundry when the phone rang. The call was short, not dramatic. He said Clara was exhausted, that they didn't even have a proper place to sit, that they'd been hosting guests on borrowed plastic chairs. I could hear the embarrassment tucked inside his voice like a folded napkin. I didn't let him finish. I told him I'd transfer something in the morning. I think he exhaled with relief. I wired the money without hesitation. It wasn't much, really. Enough for a decent sofa set, and maybe some cushions Clara would pick to match whatever palette she had in mind. Back then, it felt good, like a small gesture that said I was still needed, still part of the new chapter they were writing together. I told myself it was what mothers do: we fill in the cracks, smooth the transitions, patch the holes so our children don't have to see them. But now, when I look back at that night, it feels different. Less like generosity, more like the beginning of a habit I never meant to feed. A softness in me that began to stretch too thin, too quietly. It was Clara who sent a thank you message 2 days later. Polite, efficient. She said the sofa arrived, that it was perfect, and ended the message with a little smiley face. I stared at that message for longer than I care to admit. It felt transactional, like a receipt had been issued. Michael didn't follow up. He didn't send a picture or say what color they chose. I only saw it months later when I visited the beige three-seater with those stiff, square arms that seemed too modern for such a modest space. Clara had thrown a patterned throw over one side. It looked staged, comfortable, but not lived in. They offered me tea, and we sat awkwardly, our knees nearly touching in that narrow living room. Clara kept adjusting the cushions, tapping them just so. Michael asked about my knees, my blood pressure, and then excused himself to take a work call. I remember sitting there, sipping lukewarm tea, watching Clara scroll through her phone. Wasn't Rue just absent? Like I was a polite obligation she was checking off her list. That sofa, the one I paid for, became the first object that made me feel displaced. I didn't realize it then. I just thought I was being helpful. But later, I'd think about how easily the request had come, how casually the help had been absorbed, how little room there had been for gratitude to settle. Not resentment, just absence. It's strange how one act of kindness, if received without pause, can begin to feel like erosion, like a river trickling at the same stone again and again. Not out of malice, but persistence. Over time, the calls changed, became shorter, less warm, not cold, not yet, but clipped, like someone was in the room, Clara probably. And then the requests weren't requests anymore. They were updates. We're looking at new curtains. We need to fix the car. Clara wants to take a short course in design. I found myself offering before they asked, as if preempting their needs would keep me from becoming irrelevant. But the truth is, that night in Goshen, the night of the sofa, that was when it started. The first small leak in a dam I would spend years pretending not to notice. I kept patching, kept pouring into them, thinking it meant I still had a place. But water always finds a way to rise. When I first moved in, the air felt generous. There were welcome gestures: a vase of marigolds on the nightstand, a set of new towels folded too tightly in the wardrobe, a scented candle Clara had placed by the bathroom sink, though I never used it. She had called it a fresh start, a season of togetherness. I had nodded, even smiled, thinking perhaps this time would be different. That sharing a roof again with my son would feel like coming home, not like borrowing space. But the shift began. Quietly, the way curtains shift with the breeze, subtle, hard to name at first. My favorite tea mug, the chipped one with the faded roses, was gone. I checked every cupboard, every shelf, even the dishwasher. When I asked, Clara said she had noticed a crack and tossed it out, just like that. I said nothing, only murmured that it had lasted 20 years, but maybe it was time. A few days later, found my prayer rug neatly folded in the linen drawer, tucked beneath a pile of white bed sheets. It had always lived by my bedside, soft and familiar. I laid it back down the next morning. The morning after that, it was folded again. The third time, I didn't bother unfolding it. I prayed standing without words. There's a kind of devotion that doesn't need cloth beneath the feet. The house itself had changed too. Clara had taken to calling it a refresh. New curtains, new cushions, a rug with geometric patterns that made my eyes dizzy. She said she was going for a modern look, something airy and minimal. The old bookshelf that once held Michael's childhood novels was now bare, filled with white ceramic pieces that didn't hold anything. It was beautiful in a cold, untouched way. Then one morning, I noticed the hallway wall was bare. It took a moment to register. For years, that wall had held a single frame of black and white photo of our family at the beach. Michael was 10, hair tousled, caught mid-laugh. His father, still alive then, had his arm around me. I stood in a plain cotton camise, half smiling, wind tugging at my dupatta. It wasn't a grand photo, just real, a fragment of who we had been before life folded us inward. I stared at the empty space where it had hung. The faint outlines still marked the paint, a square of history scrubbed. Clean dot. I asked Clara about it over breakfast. She was slicing mangoes, her movements precise, her blouse uncreased. She smiled without looking up and said, "It's just clutter, Emmy. We're refreshing the space. Clutter." That word echoed louder than it should have. I nodded again. My reflex now a kind of self-defense, but inside something stilled. Not anger, something smaller, a settling. Like a stone dropping gently to the bottom of a pond. It wasn't clutter. It was memory. It was placement. It was the quiet insistence that I had once belonged here, not as a guest, not as a relic, but as the mother who had built the very foundation of what this house now pretended to be. But Clara was clever. She never raised her voice, never demanded. She didn't need to. Her dominance arrived, folded in linen, scented with eucalyptus, delivered through tiny, polite edits. One by one, my presence began to dissolve. The shelf I'd used for spices became home to small labeled jars of imported tea. My books were moved to a closed cabinet in the guest room. Even the fridge began to look different, no more leftover dal. Just neatly packed smoothie ingredients and jars I didn't recognize. Michael never noticed. Or maybe he did and chose not to say anything. He'd still kiss my forehead on his. Way to work, ask if I needed anything, then vanish into his own quiet routine. It's hard to say when the distance began because it didn't come with arguments. It came with redesign. Some afternoons, I would walk the house while they were out just to see what else had changed. A cushion moved, a drawer emptied. A picture swapped for an abstract print. One frame at a time, I was being rewritten, smoothed out, reduced to the softest corners, then quietly swept away. I stayed silent. That was my gift to them. Silence takes up very little space, but I was beginning to see the pattern. Not all erasures are loud. Some come gently, wrapped in civility, disguised as taste. And before you know it, you are the guest in a home that still calls you Amy, but no longer sets a place for you at the table of memory. It was a Sunday, one of those warm, wide afternoons where the light spills over everything a little too generously. The kind of day meant for second cups of tea and the smell of something baking. Clara had invited her friends over, women with neat voices and curated lives, the kind who carry their laughter like accessories. I stayed mostly in my room that morning, folding clothes slowly, letting the hum of conversation drift through the walls like a distant tide. I hadn't been invited, not directly. But Clara had told me just yesterday that some people would be dropping by. She'd use that phrase, dropping bys, if the gathering were casual. But the silver cutlery had come out. The fancy pitcher with the slices of lemon floating just so. And even the carpet had been vacuumed twice. This wasn't casual, was choreographed. From the half-closed door. I caught glimpses of her world, their polished shoes by the door, perfume that lingered too long in the hallway, a glass dish of hummus I'd never seen before. And Clara, moving between rooms like a hostess on a television show, perfect posture, perfect tone, calling Michael darling when she needed the water jug lifted. I didn't mind being in the background. I'd learned how to fade, to exist gently. I was fine watching. But then I heard it. Laughter, sharp, sudden, and then Clara's voice. At this rate, we should start charging her rent. There was a pause. One of those awkward half moments where people aren't sure if it's a joke or a jab. Then more laughter. Softer this time. Polite but unsure. I laughed too, quietly, from the other side of the wall. I'm not even sure why. Maybe I wanted to prove I wasn't offended. Or maybe I was trying to catch my breath. Something tightened. In my throat then? Not anger. Not yet. Just something small and warm that stayed lodged, like a stone swallowed by accident. I didn't come out for dessert. Clara didn't ask. When the guests finally left, their perfume still hovered in the air like a ghost. I stepped into the kitchen and started cleaning, even though the maid would come in the morning. It was just something to do with my hands. I washed each glass slowly, watching the water slide over fingerprints that weren't mine. Michael came in at some point. He didn't notice me at first. He was on the phone, half laughing, his voice low and too familiar. He leaned against the counter and said something I wish I could forget. She can't expect us to carry her forever. His words weren't sharp. They were smooth, resigned, almost gentle. Okay? And somehow that made them worse. I didn't speak. Just stood there, hands in the sink, pretending to rinse something that had already been rinsed. He ended the call, glanced in my direction, said something about the weather. I nodded. I always nod. That night I stared at the ceiling for hours. The fan spun above me, slicing the silence into pieces. I counted the rotations, watched the shadows shift. Every so often, I thought about that laugh, Clara's voice wrapped in sweetness, saying the thing that didn't quite sound like a joke. I wondered if Michael believed it when he said it, or if he was just echoing something he'd heard too many times. Maybe that's the cruelest kind of betrayal, the one that doesn't come with shouting or slammed doors, but with soft acceptance of someone else's rewriting of you. I thought of all the things I'd done for him, not in anger, but as a list, the kind that builds in your mind when sleep won't come. The fevers I sat beside, the lunches packed, the clothes folded with fingers that trembled from arthritis, the quiet sacrifices made not for thanks, but because that's what mothers do. We carry, without measure, without pause, and now I was the thing he had to carry. Funny how quickly you can become weight in your own. Child's eyes. I turned on my side, pulled the blanket over my shoulder, and tried to imagine a different ending to the evening. One where he heard Clara's joke and said, "Don't talk about her like that." One where he walked into the kitchen and kissed my hand the way he used to when he was little. But those are bedtime stories we tell ourselves when the world grows. Too quiet. Stories we outgrow even when we wish we died in single quotes. In the darkness, I whispered a short prayer. Not for them, not for change. Just for clarity, because when words come dressed as jokes and love starts using ledgers, something in you begins to rise. Slowly, quietly, but it rises all the same. The kitchen light was soft that evening. Just one warm bulb casting shadows across the counter tiles. I'd left the doll simmering low, its scent thick and familiar. It's the kind that clings to the air and settles into the corners of a home. The window was cracked open, and the air carried the faint trace of rain distant, waiting. I stood at the stove, stirring in slow circles, listening to the quiet drip of the tap. The gentle rhythm of a house, pretending to be whole. Michael had come in without a word, sleeves rolled up, the day still clinging to his face. He walked past me, rinsed a glass at the sink, and then, without turning, without pause, he said it. "We can't afford you any more, Amy." Just like that. As if I were something to be calculated. A subscription he'd forgotten to cancel. An unexpected charge on a credit card. He didn't even shift his weight or glance in my direction. Fares. The words had been waiting inside him, smoothed down, practiced. It was less of a declaration, more of a delivery. Like passing the salt. I didn't speak right. Away. I just watched the steam rise from the pot, curling like breath. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. In some strange way, I had been expecting this. Not in words, but in the thousand small acts that had led to it missing photographs. Folded prayer rugs, laughter I was not meant to hear. I nodded, as if what he said made sense, as if there were a logic to love being measured by expense. He dried the glass and placed it on the rack with care. It's the way people do when they're avoiding eye contact. And then he stood there, still not looking at me, waiting for something, my permission, my silence, my acceptance. He got all three. I smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just enough to soften the edges. Then I asked if he'd like some dal. It was still warm, spiced, just the way he liked it as a boy, with a hint of cumin and too much garlic. He hesitated, said, "Maybe later." Then left the kitchen like a man escaping a room where something sacred had just been broken. I sat alone at the table and ate in silence. Every bite tasted like memory thick, soft, slightly bitter. I thought about all the years I had spent feeding him. Tiny spoons of mashed vegetables, rice balls with mango pickle, fried eggs on exam mornings. Food was how I had loved him, without words, without ceremony. Just the daily insistence that he mattered. And now this man I had once rocked to sleep had found the language to dismiss me. Not with cruelty, but with indifference. And somehow that was worse. I looked around the kitchen, once mine in some distant sense. The spice rack was organized differently now. The kettle had been replaced. Clara's touch was everywhere, though she hadn't been in the room. She didn't need to be. Her absence was architectural. It structured the air. Her decisions hung. In frames and folded linens, in quiet adjustments that spoke louder than she ever did. She had reshaped him. Not violently, just steadily. Like water shaping stone. But I didn't hate her. I want to be clear about that. Claw had never shouted at me, never insulted me to my face. She didn't need to. She had learned the art of displacement. How to suggest without saying. How to step forward without pushing. And Michael, he had simply let it happen. That was his crime. Not rage, not rebellion. Just a gentle, continuous looking away. After dinner, I washed my plate slowly, dried it with a towel that no longer smelled. Like home. I put it back where it belonged, though I no longer knew if that place was mine. The house felt different now. Not hostile, just unrecognizable. I sat in my room for a long while after. No TV, no phone. Just the sound of rain beginning to fall. Soft at first, then steady. I opened the window wider and let the cool air in. It smelled like wet earth, like something waking up. I wasn't angry, not really. What I felt was quieter than anger, more refined. Like the final moment of a long-held breath, he had said what he needed to say. And I had answered in the only way I knew how. By feeding him, because sometimes the only power left is to remain kind. To serve warmth in a bowl even after they've declared you unaffordable. To offer softness in a world that keeps trying to erase you. And to do it all with your spine straight and your voice still. He had long forgotten the counts, the mutual funds his father opened before his first promotion. Fixed deposits we renewed like clockwork every spring. The parcel of land outside Hyderabad bought in my name, quietly tucked away and never spoken of after the funeral. Michael had stopped. asking about those things years ago. Maybe he assumed they no longer existed. Maybe he never truly knew how much I had carried alone after his father passed what I had guarded, what I had let sleep in the shadows. He thought I was poor, not in the cruel way some men think it, just in the lazy, unquestioning way that sons grow into when comfort becomes a given. He thought my silence meant lack, that because I never listed what I had nothing, that because I never asked for return, I had no worth to protect, but in silence. Things grow. Roots deepen when left undisturbed. Wealth, too, if left unbothered, can blossom quietly in the background, unburdened by flash or performance. Never needed to show it. I wore simple clothes, reused grocery bags, counted change at the vegetable stall not because I had to, but because I always had. And when Michael and Clara moved me into their house, I brought my habits with me folded neatly. Like everything else, what they didn't see was what lay beneath those folds, the ledgers I kept in my head, the passwords I still remembered. The quiet interest accumulating month after month in accounts with no one's name on them but mine. They didn't see it because they weren't looking. I never offered it up. Let them believe I was a burden. Let them believe I needed to be carried. I learned long ago that power doesn't always have to announce itself. Sometimes the sharpest blade is the one still in its sheath. After that evening in the kitchen, after Michael said those words like they were printed on a billy, not with bitterness, it's never been my way, but with a clarity I hadn't allowed myself in years, I took out the old folder from the bottom of my suitcase. One morning when the house was empty, I sat at the desk in the guest room, my room, and flipped through yellowing statements, property papers, tiny notations in my late husband's handwriting. He had been so careful, so exacting. Everything was accounted for, everything prepared. I touched each document like it was a thread back to a time when I was still visible, still trusted. Michael used to sit on his father's lap during tax season, pretend to stamp things. I wondered if he remembered. Probably not. Convenience has a way of making people forget what they owe. Over the years, I had done my own quiet bookkeeping, my own calculations. I knew exactly what I had, enough to live well, enough to start again, enough to stop being someone's tolerated guest. And I realized with a strange calmness that I no longer needed to wait. They had mistaken my stillness for dependence. But I had simply been observing, measuring, listening to what was never said out loud. And all the while, the garden I had planted in secret had grown roots deep enough to carry me wherever I chose to go. Clara walked into the kitchen that afternoon while I was making tea. She asked if I needed anything from the store. Her tone was casual, her eyes already halfway down her phone. I smiled and said no. She didn't notice the way I stood a little taller. Didn't hear the shift in my breath. She was used to my silence being small. She didn't yet know that silence can swell. Later that night, I made a list. Not of groceries, not of chores, but of steps, quiet steps, legal steps, dignified, irreversible steps. I didn't need anyone's permission to move anymore, only needed the right moment. And when it came, I would not raise my voice. I would not slam a door. I would not ask to be seen. I would simply act. Because sometimes the softest power is the one they never notice until it's already gone. It began with a brochure Clara left open on the dining table. A photograph of a white stone house, sunlight spilling through arched windows, a mango tree casting dappled shade over a tiled patio. She didn't say anything at first, just left it there, as if hoping the image would do the work her words couldn't. I paused when I saw it, not because I found it beautiful, it was, but because I recognized something else in it. Want later. I overheard her talking to Michael in the kitchen, her voice dipped in sugar. She said the layout was perfect. The light was soul-healing. The mango tree reminded her of her childhood. Nani's place. Michael sounded tired. He said it was out of budget. He said maybe someday. Clara didn't argue. She never argued. She let her disappointment hang in the air like lavender soft, but persistent. That evening, she showed me the house on her phone, said she didn't expect anything, just wanted to share. I nodded, admired the design, told her it was lovely. She smiled like I'd passed a test. And then the conversation drifted elsewhere, as if the house had only been a passing thought. Not a carefully placed seed, but the seed had already taken root in her. In him, in me, it stirred something different. The next morning, when they were both out, I found the address scribbled in the margin of a notebook Clara kept near the phone. I noted it down quietly. Then I called a cab and asked the driver to take me there. It was further than I thought across town. Past the noise, into a neighborhood of quiet streets and flowering hedges. The house stood like something waiting to be claimed. Pale stone, iron gate, a mango tree just starting to bloom. I walked the perimeter slowly, my hands clasped behind my back. The sun was sharp that day, but the breeze carried a sweetness that softened everything. I called a man I hadn't spoken to in years, someone who had once handled the paperwork for our Hyderabad land. He was older now, slower, but still sharp. I asked him what it would take to buy the house. No loans, no co-signing, just a clean purchase. He said he'd handle it. Kay wired the money that afternoon. I didn't tell anyone, not Michael, not Clara. I didn't need applause or confrontation. It's only a clean line between before and after. When the deed was finalized, I had the papers sent directly to the new house. I asked the courier to slide them under the door. No envelope, no explanation. Just the folded truth of ownership resting on the tiled floor. Clara had once admired from a photo. Then I came home, though. That word felt thinner now. Began packing. I didn't take much. A suitcase of clothes, a few books, my prayer rug, the chipped rose mug, which I'd quietly rescued weeks ago from the back of a cupboard. I left everything else behind. Not out of spite, but clarity. It was early evening when I wheeled my bag to the front door. Clara was in the kitchen, slicing cucumbers. Michael was adjusting the volume on the television. I told them I'd be going now. Clara turned, confused. Michael asked, where? I said, simply, somewhere with better light, no anger, no tears. Just a pause, like air leaving a room. I closed the door behind me, feeling the weight of it shift. On the street, the breeze touched my hair gently, as if in approval. I didn't look back. At the new house, I opened every window. Let the light spill in. I ran my hand along the edge of the counter. The mango trees swayed outside, casting shadows across the tiles. I brewed tea in silence and sat on the floor, watching the sky fade from orange to violet. There was no music, no chatter, just peace. Sometimes justice doesn't need an audience. It only needs a quiet room and the strength to leave without shouting. They would find the deed in a day, maybe two. They would recognize the name. Maybe they would argue. Maybe they would marvel. But it would not matter. The house Clara had longed for was mine now, and hadn't taken it from her. I had simply bought the thing no one thought I could afford freedom. In stone and sun. Now I sip tea in a sun-drenched kitchen that smells like cardamom and peace. The breeze carries a softness. I had forgotten the kind that doesn't ask anything of you. It drifts through the open windows, touches the hem of my dupatta, stirs the scent of simmering rice. Outside, the mango tree sways with a rhythm that feels familiar but doesn't demand to be named. It just moves. Like I do now. There are no footsteps outside my door, no sudden voices in the hallway, no conversations I'm not meant to overhear. Just the steady hum of a ceiling fan, the occasional creak of wood stretching in the heat, and the slow, unhurried rhythm of my own thoughts. Returning to themselves, I wake when I want. I cook only what I'll eat. Some days, I forget to check the time. I keep the windows open long after sunset. No one complains about the breeze being too strong or the smell of masala lingering. I keep the chipped rose mug by the sink. It holds. My toothbrush now. I still make tea in a plain cup, but I let it steep longer than I used to. Bitterness doesn't scare me anymore. Sometimes I wonder if they've driven by. Michael slowed the car at the turn near the white stone fence. Clara recognized the mango tree. If they pieced it all together the way I imagine they must have, quietly, resentfully, with a kind of stunned disbelief. I wonder if they read the deed twice, hoping they'd misunderstood the name on it, but I don't need to know. Their absence here is the final gift. This house is not haunted by explanations. I never owed them one. This was never about revenge. I know how stories like mine are supposed to end with grand gestures, loud exits, dramatic reckonings. But my ending was always meant to be smaller, quieter. Not an explosion, just a door clicking shut behind me. Because what I wanted wasn't to win. It wasn't to punish. I just wanted room. Room to stand. Room to exhale. Room to be someone who didn't shrink herself for the comfort of others. I keep a small corner in the hallway for my old things, a framed photo, the faded prayer rug, a brass plate with tiny chips along its edge. Nothing much, just a few pieces. Of myself I chose to carry forward. The rest I left behind. Not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer fit. Sometimes I write small notes to myself on the backs of receipts or old recipe cards. Thoughts that come while stirring lentils or folding laundry. They aren't deep, just things I want to remember. Like, you are not a burden for breathing, or some kindnesses must be kept for yourself. I stack them in a drawer by the stove. One day I may read them again, or not. I no longer feel watched. There's no need to measure my steps or soften my voice. I speak aloud sometimes, just to hear it. I say my own name. I greet the tree, thank the tea for steeping properly. It sounds strange, maybe, but there's a kind of healing in hearing yourself again after years of being muted by politeness. Michael hasn't called, not once. I don't hold that against him. Some distances are necessary. Some silences are merciful. Perhaps he believes I've abandoned him. Perhaps Clara has rewritten the story to make sense of the pieces. I don't try to correct the version they now live with. Let them build their comfort on whatever fiction they need. I have no need to be the villain nor the saint. Here, in this house, I am no one's obligation. I am not waiting to be understood. Some mornings, I pick a mango from the tree and slice it slowly at the counter. The juice runs sticky down my fingers. I don't wipe it away right away. I let it linger. Sweetness, after all, is meant to be savored. And every night before I sleep, I open the windows just a little wider. The moonlight drapes the walls. The air smells of wet leaves and soil. And I lie still, not waiting, not remembering, just breathing. For the first time in years, that's enough.